Do you have supplement confusion? Do you wish you could speak to an expert and figure out what you should take and why? If so, then you'll definitely want to go to takeyoursupplements.com because they let you speak to a holistic health coach for free. TakeYourSupplements.com health coaches have been helping people gain their health back and dial in their supplement protocols for over 20 years. Our health coaches want to help you gain your health back naturally with the best holistic medicine. They work with the highest quality vitamins, minerals, and herbs to support you in increasing your health and achieving your fitness goals. More energy, mental clarity, balanced hormones and blood sugar, better sleep, stamina, fertility, immune and digestive health. The list goes on and on. Natural medicine gives your body the raw building blocks it needs to create new healthy tissue, repair and heal. Everyone who supports their body's ability to heal itself with the right natural medicine protocols feels and sees a substantial positive shift in their well-being. So if you want to feel and look healthier, go to takeyoursupplements.com, fill out the form, and one of our amazing, highly experienced health coaches will speak with you for free and help you order the right supplements for you at the right price. They help you to order directly from the manufacturers, so the savings are passed on to you. Plus, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you know you will get results or your money back. These are the exact same supplements that my husband and I have been on for years, and the same supplements that we give to our child. I love these supplements. They really work, of course, alongside a very healthy diet, which another benefit of going to takeyoursupplements.com is you will have the aid of your health coach who will help you dial in your diet and your supplement protocols to help you gain your health back and gain all of your health and fitness goals. So it's really a win-win situation for you. Visit takeyoursupplements.com today and try them out. Give them a try and see just how amazing you feel with their help. Takeyoursupplements.com. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 471. I'm so excited for today's guest. We have Dr. Joan Ifland on the show, who has groundbreaking research in how to recover from food addiction. She's designed a program that helps people with severe processed food addiction overcome that. And what I really like, Joan, is that you mentioned that those who have food addiction have been severely disrespected in the media, even from certain therapies. It's a not well understood addiction, and it has a really negative stigma, and people feel a lot of shame and guilt about their food addiction. And I'm really excited for you today to unpack what it is. What is food addiction? It's such a strange thing to me because we have to eat, right? Like, you don't have to drink alcohol, you don't have to smoke cigarettes, you don't have to do heroin, but we have to eat. And so to have such a day-to-day, moment-to-moment struggle with the internal desire for food and that hunger that never goes away, and all the body shame around that, it really eats the person alive. And then to feel like they can't get any help, right? Because there's such a stigma around it. So I love the work that you do. You're making such a headway in this field, and I'm looking forward today for you to share some tools and for us to dive into this. And I hope that listeners who have, and I think that there's degrees of food addiction, and there's degrees of recovery. And so I hope that for all listeners who have caught themselves realizing that whatever part of the spectrum they're on in their recovery or in food addiction, that they're able to gain a foothold and some healing today and some tools that they can take away and continue to grow. So welcome to the show.
Yay, thank you. Wow, that was the best introduction. Well done. You're very clear on the issues and the context in which these issues have developed. Well done.
Oh,
Well
well,
done.
I want to start by saying that this topic is no stranger to me. I watched
Mm-hmm.
my father struggle with food addiction. I watched my mother, and I don't know if she had I don't know what flavor food addiction she had, but she had definitely body shame, body issues. She was always dieting. It was like the last 15 pounds to lose. My mother was never overweight, but there was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of control around food, and then she would binge red jujubes, and that was her secret. So
Oh
she would
boy.
she would eat almost nothing, right? She would have almost nothing, and then she would maybe eat, handfuls of red jujubes, uh,
Oh.
and she would have like she believed that low fat, so she bought into like okay, I'm gonna grill a chicken breast and I'm gonna have half a cup of broccoli, and like that's my lunch, right? And she believed
Mm.
that any carb, like any starch, I should say, was really unhealthy. So she would yell at me if we were at a restaurant, I ordered like a fish with a side of rice. She would stand. She did this when she stood up in the restaurant and yelled at me. And I was about 12, and she shamed
Wow.
me and yelled at me because I
Oh,
ordered
I'm sorry.
rice. And so, I
Oh,
mean, in her mind, she was so afraid that if you ate a starch that you would get fat. And that was so I
yeah.
grew up in this very controlling food was a control was very controlled, and she had a lot of emotion and upset around it. And then my dad, on the other
Yeah.
hand, he snuck food and was always up and down 100 pounds and just
Wow.
yo-yoing. And
Yeah.
then for me, I really have seen that food, and I don't gravitate towards processed food because I've learned it's so not healthy for me and for anyone. But for me,
Yeah.
I have worked on the emotions around food and around binge eating, overeating, and food addiction. I've been working on that for years and just seen I've seen people who are sort of worse off than me and people who are better off, and like I said, that's why I feel it's a spectrum, and I feel that even someone who
Yeah.
seemingly looks healthy could have
Yeah.
a food addiction, and just like any addiction, it's we we go towards addiction. In my experience, I'd love for you to fill in the details, but we go towards an addiction for that dopamine, for that sense of control and that sense of relief. It's a stress relief, and it's in that dopamine in the brain when so it is a coping mechanism, but it's also like our blanket, our binky, like the something that comforts us when we're in high stress, and it gives us that relief. um but I'd love to dive in and find out, like, what starts food addiction. Why do some people go towards heroin and they don't have food addiction, and other people are
Mm-hmm.
other people have food addiction? What is it about that the people that end up with food addiction, why didn't they end up with heroin addiction? Like,
Uh-huh.
it's such a different thing.
It's this is a really, really great way to start the interview. And I do want to say I'm sorry for the modeling and the behavior of your parents. But it does answer your opening question, which is how the heck do we get this? And you got it from your parents,
Mhm.
the processed food industry, the health industry, the diet industry.
Mhm.
They all contribute to the development of processed food addiction in different ways. Um, but let me start out with the mechanics. So, what is actually going on in the brain?
Mhm.
And this is a great gift that brain imaging technology has given us is an understanding of what's going on in the brain. Because prior to a clear understanding of the mechanics, these brain cells are hyperactive, these brain cells are not active. Prior to that, people made up stories about addictions. oh, this person was weak-willed. If they just had more willpower, they'd be able to conquer it. Or they don't like themselves, or they lack self-control, or they're, even immoral. And so all these stories about addicted people have sprung up, and none of them are true. None of them are true at all. It's simple in concept and thousands of complexities in implementation for recovery. But the concept is quite simple. And it happens in stages. So step one is reward system brain cells are taught through Pavlovian conditioning to explode with feel-good neurotransmitters. How do you teach a cell to explode with feel-good neurotransmitters? Is you ingest substances that cause those cells to explode, literally flood the brain with enough craving neurotransmitter to control behavior. And that is the key to everything, is that once you have addicted brain cells and they are putting out this flood of neurotransmitter, that alone is capable of controlling behavior. So those neurotransmitters go over to the motion center, the behavior center in the brain, and latch on to the behavior brain cells, and you are going to get the substance. So here's what is not happening, is the frontal lobe, which is where rational thought lives.
Yeah, where's the frontal lobe in any of this?
So the blood flow has been pulled off to the addicted brain cells, and the frontal lobe is not firing. It's literally not firing. So all the good things that you've learned, the determinations, all that stuff is not available. It's like that part of your computer has crashed. There's no data in and there's no data out, and there's certainly no control. Okay, so the recovery then, well, here's the next step then. Anything associated with those substances is actually more powerful in being able to trigger the addicted brain cells. So maybe you have a friend and you go and you get addictive substances with that friend. That friend is now what's called an associative cue, an associative trigger. That just seeing that friend can set those addicted brain cells off to creating this flood of cravings. So in the case of processed foods, there are so many different substances that all four of the major feel-good reward pathways have become addicted. So that's dopamine and serotonin and opiate and cannabinoid. And this is one of the reasons why this particular addiction is so hard to give up. And then the other piece of it is that the processed food industry was really taken over by big tobacco in the mid-1980s. They have an addiction business model. They deliberately train those feel-good pathways to become reactive to cueing. So you associate processed foods with everything because they're everywhere. They're at your school, they're at your faith organization, they're at your workplace, they're all over your house. Hopefully not anymore, but they're on the road, they're on TV, they're everywhere. So you are constantly, by association, being stimulated to release those craving brain chemicals that do, if they build up enough, they will get control of behavior. So that's how you get an addiction. It's you first, the substance is ingested, the substance causes this eruption, And then you begin to get the cued eruption. You're not using the substance, but you have an association with it. And that starts setting off this flood that controls behavior.
Now, you
So let me
said
just
the
stop there. Does
yeah,
that help?
yes, that's great. And
Okay.
I have questions. So when you said there's an associated person, but that's like the Pavlovian trigger, the anchor. It could
Mm-hmm.
also be a location. It could be
Mm-hmm.
smells. It can
Mm-hmm.
be marketing, like you see the brands, you see the logo or the box.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, location, right? Like I think back to a location where I would have
Mm-hmm.
ingested a substance that it caused
Mm-hmm.
all of the feel good chemicals to go off. Then
Yeah.
just even thinking about being back in that location for
Yes.
me. So it's also like it could be music if music was playing at the time of the
Yes.
heightened. So maybe not everyone knows what the Pavlovian response is. It's when you're at a heightened emotional state and there's another stimulus around, your brain will then anchor those two together. And therefore, like
Mm-hmm.
if you then, a song is playing when you're at a heightened state, the next time that song plays, it will trigger that heightened state, not as much, but it will
Mm-hmm.
trigger it enough for you to think back and maybe start wanting that again. My husband said something very interesting. He goes, it's the first time you do, I'm just going to say substance, right? Because that it could be
Any
drug, alcohol,
substance.
whatever substance
Mm-hmm.
is, the first time you do it is not as good as the next time or the time after. And he noticed he did a substance, let's say it's a chocolate chip cookie, whatever the substance was, he did it and he loved it so much. And then he did it 20 more times throughout a few months trying to chase that high. And he said it
Mm-hmm.
never was as good as the first time. Can you explain why is it that like the first time it's amazing and then we tend to try to chase that high of
Mm-hmm.
maybe in our memory is like our memory it feels like it's so amazing and then we kind of get disappointed, like I ate a chocolate cookie, it's like wow, this wasn't as good as that other time, and then I'm going
Yeah.
to keep trying to find the chocolate cookie that brings back that
Yeah.
that first time. It
Yeah, you're asking a super excellent question. But let me elaborate on the first part of what you
mhm.
just said, and then I'll go into the kind of the diminishing return.
Yes.
So why is it that the brain so easily picks up these associative cues? People, places, things, time of year, time of day. Why? It's because if you believe in evolution, every time a human for 7 million years found food, the brain would mark every detail of that moment. Because a year later, with no ability to record anything, just relying on memory, that human would have to find that place again at that time of year. And maybe even at that time of day, if, for example, it was maybe an egg and you needed to go up and get the eggs when the parent birds were off foraging. It's the brain time stamps every detail, and this also true for addictions. And because these foods, they're not food, so the sugar, flour, gluten, excessive salt, dairy, processed fats, caffeine, food additives, the brain is not registering those as food. They're registering them as addictive drugs. But addictive drugs, time stamping works the same way. So if you were a human, 1 million years ago, and you found food, your brain would timestamp every detail of that moment, the weather, the plants, the mountains, the path, the location of the stream, the time of day, who's with you, and the terrain, the soil, every detail, so that you could find it again in a year with no ability to record any detail of it. So it's every detail. I mean, you may think, oh, it could be a color, it could be anything. The brain will just look at every detail. And then, of course, the food industry exploits that by putting those associative cues in front of people all the time. Okay, so I just wanted to reinforce exactly what you were saying. Now, why are there diminishing returns? This is called tolerance or progression. There are two easy things to understand. One is when the brain has had a big, an abnormal amount of anything, there is a counteracting emotion. So when the feel-good pathways have had this extraordinary flood, the counteracting motion is for the stress pathway to release stress. It's called the corticotropin releasing factor pathway, and it sends messages to the adrenal glands to release cortisol and create some stress and put the brain back into balance. So that part of the brain also gets trained to respond, and it will respond sooner and sooner and sooner as it picks up the Pavlovian conditioning. That's one reason why there is diminishing return. The other reason is that the way two neurons, two brain cells communicate is across a gap called a synapse. And the way it works is cell number one releases the neurotransmitter. Cell number two has a receptor. And in the case of the reward pathways, the receptor is a C-shaped receptor. So the neurotransmitter actually hits like a ball into a C. Now, what happens over time, because those receptors are not designed to maintain that level of bombardment. Now, every time, the first time it happens, all of the neurotransmitter hits, they all hit receptors, and the pleasure is transmitted through the nervous system. But the second time, the body is saying, no, 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 no. We cannot tolerate this amount of excitement, pleasure. We're not designed to do that. The brain will start to shut down receptors to prevent that surge. And over time, it just shuts down more and more and more and more. So this is why you don't get the pleasure from it, but you continue to pursue it, because if you stop, then only the stress pathways are active. And it hurts. It hurts to stop. That is withdrawal. That's how we know that this is drugs. People continue to use processed foods. There, at some point, and this could take months or years, at some point you're not getting any pleasure out of it at all. There are so many receptors that are shut down. We actually see this on they're called PET scans, positron emission topography scans, where a healthy person has these bright red dopamine receptor fields. Obese people don't have them, and cocaine addicted people don't have them. It's one of our strongest pieces of evidence that this is drug addiction and doesn't really have anything to do with eating. Just like the tobacco industry hid nicotine in cigarettes and addicted people by hiding the addictive substance, they once tobacco came into processed foods, they hired a consultant, Howard Moskowitz, to hide the maximum amount of sugar, fat, salt in foods before people could detect it. So it's just diabolical, but none of it was our fault. But this is, you do in the progression, you feel worse and worse and worse. The depression and anxiety is increasing, but it's increasing in response to the substances, to the mechanical kind of almost like an allergic reaction. Now you have this big flood of neurochemical being released. There are fewer and fewer neurotransmitter receptors to send the message, and you're still having this stress reaction. So people's emotional profiles just fall apart.
A few years ago, I was reading a study that talked about these PET scans, and the TLDR was people who are not obese don't think about food. They don't really get pleasure from thinking about food or planning it. But when they eat, they actually receive pleasure. And
Mhm.
those who had obesity or and food addiction, those who had obesity spend a lot of time thinking about and planning their next meal, planning their next snack, really getting stimulated, like the pleasure centers getting stimulated over thinking about it. But then when they went to eat, it was so disappointing that the sort of the
Yep.
fantasy, kind of like porn addiction, the fantasy is better than reality.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
uh, and I thought that was fascinating. Is there a way to reverse it? Is there a way to reverse it so that those who, like you said, those who have food addiction and also cocaine addiction, that those centers of the brain aren't lighting up anymore? Is there a way to heal the brain and come back from this?
Yes. Yes. What you have to do is give the whole system a big rest.
Mhm.
You have to stop stimulating it. Now, if for alcohol or cocaine addiction, you avoid the cues. So you avoid the people that you used with, and you don't drive past the crack house. Find another way. So this is part of the complexity of recovering from processed food addiction, is because it's everywhere. So you have two pathways. One is to avoid the cueing, and two is to neutralize cues. You can rewire the brain to associate the substances with pain. And people are more driven by pain aversion than they are by pleasure seeking. This is
Mm.
great research coming out of the economics field. So, like in our programs, if somebody, we encourage people to come into the program and talk about a lapse so that they can then immediately associate the pain with it. There's a lot of pain from processed foods, physical,
Mhm.
mental, and emotional, behavioral. It's quite destructive. It's just as destructive. It looks very different, but it's just as destructive as any drug addiction. So the name of the game is to train the brain that when you think about that food, you think about the headache, the stomach ache, the screaming at your children, the fatigue, the not able to sleep, the racing thoughts, the intense cravings, the breaking out of skin, the stomach ache, the asthma, the inflammatory properties, and the infections and cancer and diabetes and heart disease. Processed foods attack cell function in 8 different ways. So there are 144 conditions associated by research with processed foods. It's not hard to come up with a very long list of things that go haywire when you eat processed foods. And let me go back to something that you started out saying, Ashley. We have to drink. I mean, we have to eat. So that would be like saying to an alcoholic, well, figure out how to use alcohol because you have to drink.
Right.
No, we all know how to divide the world of beverages into safe and alcoholic,
Right.
non-alcoholic and alcoholic, and then there's really a third category, which is the druggy sugared beverages. And so we do the same thing with food. We have safe unprocessed foods, and then we have addictive processed foods. It is the processing that concentrates natural endorphins in the food to the point where they're strong enough to train these reward centers to release craving neurotransmitters.
Mhm. Is there a particular diet that helps us heal the brain faster, or the fastest way diet that doesn't stimulate, like overstimulate the pleasure centers?
Yeah. Um, if it's okay if I mention a website,
Sure.
processedfoodaddiction.com, and just sign up for the free information, and you will get two lists. One is the excluded food list. This is based on research I wrote and edited the textbook for the field, Processed Food Addiction Foundations Assessment and Recovery. I wrote the whole food plan chapter in that textbook. It's based on 250 studies. We know the research is clear that that there's a whole range of substances, addictive substances that have been added to our food or just presented, through advertising that they are food. They're not food, they're drugs. It's just like the tobacco industry was able to persuade us that cigarettes are sexy. Cigarettes are disgusting and repulsive, or cigarettes are rebellious.
Right.
No, they're killing you, or that they're sophisticated, or they're modern, or any of those things. They're none of those things. So these are fantasies that the tobacco companies created in order to get people to use the addictive substances often enough to create the conditioning of the reward centers. They've done exactly the same thing with these drugs. They've created the delusion that they're food. They're not food. They're just not food. So we do have the excluded list, and then we have the clean list. And now inside our programs, we do teach people a rotation method to figure out which foods on the unprocessed list are harmful to that individual. There's not a food plan. My food plan is completely different from anybody else's food plan. I'm 70 years old. When I started this out when I was 44 years old, almost 26 years ago, I ate a completely different food plan. The commonality from all these food plans, these highly individualized, personalized food plan, is they don't have drugs in them. So step one is to get the drugs out of your food. And step two is to use a rotation method to see if you're allergic to any of the unprocessed foods. Like I can't eat the nightshade group, I can't eat the citrus group, and I can't eat the gourds, the melons and zucchini and squash. I can't. Those are just three groups that I've had a lifelong asthma, and they kick up my asthma, so I don't eat them.
And for others, the symptoms might be not as obvious. Figuring out your food sensitivities, it's a fun game. You definitely, you could benefit from working with an experienced naturopathic physician or functional medicine practitioner. And there's also evidence to suggest that leaky gut syndrome, which of course we can definitely develop from eating processed foods, and particularly gluten grains, barley, wheat, and rye, and even oats, which contain gliadin, similar to gluten, that causes leaky gut syndrome, which increases food sensitivities and the body overreacting to certain foods. So healing the gut and also the microbiome, and I have several episodes on that listeners can go to learntohealth.com and use the search function to find them, but several interviews on healing the microbiome of the gut and healing leaky gut syndrome. So there are ways to support the body in overcoming some food sensitivities, but then others are baked into the cake. Like for you've noticed that nightshades do not complement your physiology, and so you avoid them. I think it's really important to also listen to the body, because problems with sleep, problems with concentration, mood swings, even skin problems, these all can be from foods that we're having sensitivities towards. But my big thing is whole foods. If it came from the ground or if it's its whole form, it's not processed, and therefore it's much more likely to not trigger the hyper response that processed foods are designed to, like designer drugs, right?
Yes, exactly. This is this is a business model that is used by alcohol, by marijuana, by vaping, by tobacco, by processed foods. Even the pharmaceutical industry used it to start the opioid epidemic. The way they marketed it to doctors, very deceptive. There were hidden addictive properties to the product, which they did not tell the doctors about. So the doctors prescribed it freely, and people became very addicted. It's very, very sad. It's very sad. Yeah, and our government just stands by and lets it happen.
Oh, no, the government actually invests in it through food
Mm-hmm.
subsidies, or we're
Mm-hmm.
subsidizing crops that directly benefit the processed food industry. And not only
Yep.
that, the processed food industry lobbies so that these foods are fed to prisoners and to
Yep.
children in schools. I cannot even begin to wrap my brain around, when you look at what public school children are fed, the amount of processed food they are fed, the amount of sugar, and then they're given drugs for ADHD, and it is just like the
Yes.
perfect storm. It's like the pharmaceutical industry got together with Big Food, and Big Pharma got together and said,
Yes.
let's both work together to lobby to increase our profits. Let's fill children with sugar and with artificial dyes, and
Yeah.
then we'll create a drug that they need, because they're going to be so hyper off the wall, because we're
Yeah.
putting their brains are being put on a barbecue,
Yeah.
they're putting in the deep fryer. Basically, their brains are so hopped up on all these excitotoxins and all the neurotransmitters that are so
Yep.
hyped up. It's like they're on cocaine, and then we're gonna have to give them drugs. When I was a
Yep.
kid, there was only, like, in a classroom of 30 kids, there'd be one kid with ADHD, like one kid was on Ritalin,
Mm-hmm.
and now it is so much more
Most.
common, and it
Yeah.
is these children's brains are still developing, and to put them on these drugs will affect them for the rest of their lives. The long-term devastating effects of being put on Ritalin or Adderall, it is incredibly harmful for a growing child, and food is the main culprit. I've had several
Processed foods.
the processed foods, I apologize. Yes, the
Yes.
processed foods
Yeah.
are the culprit that is creating this. I have several
Yep.
episodes on ADHD and overcoming it, and healing the brain and
Mm-hmm.
healing the body, and correcting the diet for ADHD. And it is just it is when we have to get the 30,000-foot view, and we have to study the history of the last 100 years to really understand the amount of marketing, the amount of very intentional, um the creation of what we live in today. I like to talk, I've said this on the show before. So I grew up in the 80s. I was born in 1980. I'm 41 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and I grew
Mm-hmm.
up in Canada. So a little bit different from the States, but not much.
Yeah.
And I remember watching, Kellogg's commercial, watching, milk, it does a body good, and watching
Mm.
the Tony the Tiger, and all these different uh childlike characters for all the different cereals, and it made me
Mm-hmm.
feel good. I really remember can still think of, now I never ate any of these cereals because my mom would let any sugar in the house. My mom was very
Super.
controlling over food. Luckily, like, it's kind of, it
Yeah.
did have its benefits. Once a year on my birthday, I was allowed to eat whatever I want, and you bet I ate cereal. I ate honeycomb, even though it tore my
Uh,
mouth up, and I remembered that. But once a year, I was allowed to have, pizza, pop, and whatever junk food. But the rest of the year, there was no junk
uh-huh.
food. And
Uh-huh.
that's a good thing. It's a good thing, but I think that there needs to be a balance to teach a child how to make their own choices, so they don't rebel when they're older, like I did. And I remember
Well,
watching the marketing, and then
yeah.
going into the grocery store and seeing it on the shelves. And you know what it instilled in me, although I never ate them, it instilled in me a sense of safety. I remember, because I grew up with all this
Oh,
marketing, and then I walk past all these cereal boxes. Oh, the
interesting.
familiar faces. Look, there's that rooster. There's that little ghost character. There's the Tony the Tiger.
Yeah.
And it was like
Yeah.
all these familiar faces, the branding. You see, these companies, the tobacco companies, they don't just market for the next 5 or 10 years. They're generational marketing. They plan
Yeah.
on paying for marketing so that a 4-year-old will buy their products when they're 40. And
Exactly.
that, so they're the marketing involved. And so when you said that we have to take ourselves away from the stimulant, and choose foods that aren't going to create that stimulant, but also walking through a grocery store alone,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
bombarded by all the logos, even from your childhood.
Yeah. So we have innovated a very, very new approach to this particular addiction. We get it deep, deep, deep down on the inside. Just spent 3 years full time developing, editing, writing the textbook, researching the textbook. And there are two things I got out of doing that. One, we've never had such a severe addiction on the face of the earth because there's so many different substances, because we're being bombarded with cueing,
Mm-hmm.
because the illnesses that develop are so debilitating. But you hit on the thing that's never really happened before is once high fructose corn syrup was introduced to the market, the drugs could be cheap enough to be marketed heavily to children.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are born to two parents using processed foods, the very first DNA replication will be of an addicted DNA strand. And you
Mm.
never have 1 minute. You're born. If your mother's eating sugar, the sugar's coming through the breast milk. If you're not, then the baby formula industry has loaded sugar into baby formula. So it starts at a very young age. There are many complications of that. The blood flow is being pulled to the addicted brain cells and away from the frontal lobe. So all the major frontal lobe functions are now impaired, and that includes being able to pay attention, learn, make decisions, control impulses, and remember. So you see these epidemics of impairment in those areas.
Can you
So what it
could we pause for a sec? Can you go back? I think that just really is something that needs to be underlined. So, what are the functions of the brain that are impaired?
so the whole frontal lobe is not getting blood flow.
Mm-hmm.
And the very highly specialized cells in the frontal lobe that distinguish us from animals are things like the ability to pay attention to something for a long time. That's not getting any blood flow. That's attention deficit.
Mm.
Learning is in the frontal lobe. This is very different from just mechanical Pavlovian conditioning of the midbrain or the primitive brain. So you have learning difficulties there. If so, here's the thing: if I'm going to assert that this is a very, very widespread addiction, then you have to show things. You have to show an agent who's creating the addiction. Okay, we got the processed food industry, and we have the complicity of the government. And you're absolutely right. If you say big farm, you can spell that PHARM or FARM, right? PHARM. So you have the blood flow being pulled away from the frontal lobe where you have attention paying, you have learning, you have decision making. And this is different from the reflexive behaviors that come out of the midbrain. Frontal lobe is able to create conscious behavior if those cells have blood flow. But the addicted brain, the blood flow is going back into the addicted brain cells and the stress pathways and the locomotion pathways.
Mm.
You don't have good decision making, which we see rampantly. You don't have impulse control, and you don't have memory. Those are all frontal lobe functions. So you have epidemic of Alzheimer's, and you have epidemic of poor impulse control. So I know I went into the quote unquote kind of the online basement of the U.S. Department of Agriculture to write. Our research team published the first description of refined food addiction in the academic press. So we
Mm.
got to name the disease. But for that article, I said, I've got to show exactly which substances were increased in use through the obesity epidemic. So I think I went to like 1970 and 1997. And the substances that were increased in use were high fructose corn syrup, gluten-containing flour, high-fat dairy, and potatoes. So frozen potatoes, French fries, fried potatoes. And beans did not increase. Red meat did not increase. Though none of those real foods increased. And so they're always trying to point, oh, see, carbs are bad.
Right.
Or red meat, oh, red meat's bad. No, none of the consumption of those did not increase in between those 2 years. So if I'm going to say that processed food addiction is behind these cognitive impairments, this mental impairment, I've got to make all those pieces fit together, and they do. The research is just incredibly consistent. If you say, well, these foods are causing the problems, then you better be pointing at epidemics of those problems. Because at that point, so 1997, people are eating a pound per person per day of sugars, gluten-containing flour, high-fat dairy, and fried potatoes. So that was then. And as we were just talking, the progression, the tolerance, eating more of the substances over time, that was 20 years ago. That data is from 20 years ago. Now we have new research actually coming out of Canada showing that adolescents are eating 67% of their calories in these processed foods. So it's just, and that probably doesn't include dairy. People don't know to include dairy in the category of processed foods. So you would, if you're going to say that processed foods cause these problems, then you're going to have to point to epidemics of those problems at that consumption level. And there they are. There are the epidemics. Diabetes, heart disease, stroke, obesity, Alzheimer's, dementia, learning disabilities, attention span, poor decision making, poor impulse control, memory loss, and then all the rest of them. You would have to see gut disorders. You would have to see inflammatory diseases, and they're all there. They're all epidemics.
Everything that you mentioned, people feel, it makes them feel worse. And so then they reach, this is the catch-22, this is the cycle, right? They feel bad because they have those conditions, and then they need that pick-me-up because they feel bad, so then they reach for one of these foods.
It's this is the insanity. It's the insanity of it's the mental illness aspect of it. You also have all the emotional disorders because of the downregulated, it's called downregulated, when those feel-good receptors start collapsing. They look like the head of a dead iris. Now you cannot process good feelings. And you see this very minuscule but very disturbing, not yet statistically significant increase in suicides across all ages, but among children.
Yes.
So why?
Suicide is the second leading cause of death among children today.
It's because their world, all the pathways in the brain that would bring reasons for optimism or some kind of future are collapsed. It's a mechanical problem. And so you have depression. And now you have all this extra adrenaline, because remember, the stress pathways are compensating for these surges of euphoria. You have extra adrenaline, which is anger and anxiety. I got into this field 26 years ago because I got off of just sugars and flours to solve a weight problem, and my raging went away. I wasn't expecting that. The sinus infection went away, the bloating went away, the weight was coming off easily, the cravings went away, the brain fog went away, all that stuff went away, and I was thrilled. The allergies went away, the fatigue, it was amazing. It was like I was winning the lottery every day. But when I got to the third week of that program, and realized that I hadn't raged at my husband or children. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't criticized, I hadn't found anything wrong with them. I I got I got a new career. I was a Stanford MBA. I had a corporate career, which I had to let go of because I was too sick, too allergic to go back to work, too
Mm.
tired, too brain fogged. But instead of going back into the corporate world, I began looking for the research. And that was 26 years ago. The impact on personality of these drugs is
Hmm.
horrifying.
You
And so
described.
people will,
Oh, sorry to interrupt. You described my mom. Like, my mom ate
yes,
90%
yes,
of the time she ate so strict because she had to like
yes.
keep her figure. Um, but then she would sneak these jujubes and she'd sneak these chocolates and then she'd just rage at us, just snap. And
Rage.
like I said, she stood up in a restaurant and started yelling at me because I ordered a dish that had a side of rice. It was like
Mhm,
with like steamed vegetables and a grilled fillet of fish. Like I remember
mhm.
I purposely made this like really conscious effort. Like I really wanted to impress her with making a good choice on the menu.
Yep,
And then she just stood up and like
yep.
screamed at me. Like just
I'm so
the
sorry.
and she would throw things, like, she would just snap and start raging,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
man, that does really sort of describe that, and she had, a huge problems concentrating. I remember she couldn't follow movies, like, she was wonderful as a businesswoman, like, she owned her own business, it was incredibly successful, so she had a lot on her mind, but, she admitted that, like, when we went to plays or musicals, she couldn't follow the plot. We watched movies, she didn't
Wow.
really follow the plot, and she read all the
Mm.
time. Like I found her to be incredibly intelligent, but her concentration and her raging, I mean, I wonder if that was if that was linked to her own food addiction.
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
These are drugs. These are characteristic behavior of people with cocaine addiction or alcoholism. These really vast mood swings. On top of the elevated adrenaline, these processed carbohydrates, particularly, get into the bloodstream all at once. They're pre-digested. There's no
Mm.
breaking down process. So you get these glucose highs, and then the pancreas is already, the pancreas can be conditioned to anticipate this surge of glucose in the bloodstream, which is deadly, by the way. If your glucose is too high, your brain goes out. So it's deadly. So the pancreas is on red hot alert. Oh, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. It'll start releasing insulin before the glucose even gets there.
Yeah.
So you're constantly have these highs. And then in the crash, it's the adrenal gland that goes back over to the fat cells and pulls glucose out so that you don't die from low blood sugar. There are two danger zones the high blood sugar, the low blood sugar, and then there's the safety zone in between. So when you are crashing, the insulin has been released and your blood sugar is falling, you totally lose control of behavior. 80% of violent offenders in prison have hypoglycemia, not enough. So it's unstable blood glucose. And yes, I noticed, and then on top of that, you lay on the caffeine. So caffeine works by blocking a calmness function on the nervous system. So the part of the nervous system that is designed to emit messages of calmness, peacefulness, contentment, caffeine blocks that function. So you can't feel calm. You're not caffeine doesn't work because you're more alert. Caffeine works because you're less calm. It's
Yeah,
a
it
nasty
blocks
combination.
the receptor that it blocks the part of the brain that tells you you're tired. So it numbs this part of the brain
Mhm.
so your body is tired, but your
Mhm.
brain's not gonna tell you you're tired. It's
Mhm.
blocking the tiredness. I mean, that is, just such a great example of our entire food industry, our entire processed food industry. It's like, we're gonna jack you up. We're gonna you wake up
Oh
and you're
man.
tired, so don't I mean, okay. Dr. Molly Niedermeyer, who's a naturopathic physician, she was the dean of naturopathic medicine at Bastyr University. I think she was one of the first deans. She's been practicing for well over 30 years, and what she said is I had her on the show, and she said a 5% reduction in hydration leads to a 25% reduction in energy production. ATP can't be created when we don't have enough, or it can't be created as well. We don't have enough water. So we wake up dehydrated. And what do? We're tired. We're cranky because we had a bad night's sleep, because we're rolling on the sugar highs and lows. Then and all the stimulants from the processed foods. And so then we reach for caffeine. Caffeine
Yeah.
dehydrates us further and blocks the ability for us to even recognize and get in touch with our body and feel that we're tired.
Yep.
And then what you
Yep.
said is it blocks the calmness in the brain. So now we're more agitated. Then add sugar to that and we rage.
Exactly. It impairs, it just makes dysfunctional, painfully dysfunctional every system in the body. Every system.
We don't have access to the logic centers of our brain anymore, so we can't think critically. And then we go around our life reacting to things instead of planning and controlling our behaviors. If we control our behaviors, we control our outcomes in life. If we don't have
Yeah.
control of our behaviors, we don't have control of our outcomes. We feel out of control, and then we reach towards substances that allow us to, in the moment, feel like we have control, which furthers the
Yeah.
cycle.
And feelings drive the whole thing, and feelings are now being controlled by the substances.
Yeah.
But can I offer your listeners a ray of hope?
Yes. I'm glad we painted the picture, though. I think it's really important to really understand that someone who is involved in food addiction, and possibly even their parents, their grandparents, this could be generational, that it's not because, like you said, they're weak-willed or they don't love themselves enough, or there's something wrong and bad and shameful about them. Their brain chemistry has been hijacked by an industry since for some people, since birth.
Since conception.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is one system in the brain, in the body, which works no matter what. No matter what else is going on, this one system continues to work. And this fact that it continues to work will either kill you or save you. And I am talking about mirror neurons. So mirror neurons, they're quite a recent discovery. It was discovered in Italy, in a monkey lab in Italy. What they do is they copy the behavior of the people they see the most. And why they're the second most powerful system in the brain. The most powerful system in the brain is the autonomic system, which is making our heartbeat and our blood flow. And then there's under one particular circumstance, the fear of famine brain, the food-seeking brain, will become more powerful than mirror neurons. But there has to be a pretty severe famine going on for it to take precedence over mirror neurons. So mirror neurons are the second most powerful system in the brain for a very good reason. For 7 million years of human evolution, if you were accepted into a tribe of 7 to 12 other humans, you lived, you survived, because they could find food, find shelter, protect your children, and protect you from predators. If you were the kind of person who liked wandering off by yourself, well, the predators were waiting for you. And the evidence on this is kind of shocking. But in prehistoric hyena caves, the anthropologists, archaeologists have found human bones in the bone piles. So we know that at least hyenas ate humans. So in the evolution, mirror neurons became, if you had really good mirror neurons, you would live. So in the evolution of humans, mirror neurons take just increasing precedence in the hierarchy of the brain. Now, the food industry knows this tragically well. And this is why you will see commercials on TV that feature people sitting on sofas watching TV.
Mm.
You see one of those commercials, your mirror neuron says, oh yeah, that's my tribe. I'm going to the kitchen because I need something to eat. You have, so you have the opportunity to get free of all of the brain malfunctions, all the brain dysfunction, is to find a tribe of 7 to 12 people that you are going to spend most of your time with. And this is the breakthrough that we have incorporated into our online community. We offer 15 hours a day of live programming. There is a real trained person on that Zoom screen. And because you can just pop in, you can pop in for 5 minutes, you can pop in for an hour, you can pop in for all 15 hours, and then you can fill in the gaps through the day with videos from our video library that we have made ourselves. And so what happens, and it's pretty cool. I mean, it's just so cool. It's so hopeful, is what a short period of time it takes for mirror neurons to swing away from the unhealthy people in our lives over to the healthy people. And we are seeing that screens work perfectly well. Only the 2% of the brain that is the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is teensy, 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 tiny. The frontal lobe cannot win in any kind of competition with any other, modules, nodules, nodes, cortexes in the brain. It's too tiny. It's way too tiny. But what the frontal lobe can do is it can control the messaging that reaches the other 98% of the brain. And that's the hope of the world.
Fascinating. So throughout the day, if someone is struggling or like catching themselves in the middle of a food choice, they could log in. And what does that look like? They log into the group video chat. What does that look like?
Yeah, so it's a Zoom room. We have a Zoom room for those 15 hours. One of those hours is a conference call, because then we can record the conference call. We don't record anything on Zoom for confidentiality, but we do record the conference call. They can listen to that conference call then any time of day. So this is the idea for this came from writing the textbook. When I got to the realization, there are 11 specific signs for addiction. And I wrote a full chapter on how present those signs are in overeaters. So there are 11 chapters in the textbook describing each one of those diagnostic criteria as they manifest in overeating. They were criteria that are adapted from diagnosing the existence of alcoholism. So they're adapted to overeating. And that's also on the processedfoodaddiction.com website. So once I got that, oh, it's a severe addiction. Oh my gosh. And people are severely traumatized by having had it. The addiction itself alone would be traumatizing. It creates so much pain. But then you get all this insanity out of the health industry. The diet industry is working away to wake up your fear of famine brain. Now you have fear of famine on top of the addiction. It's another reason why it's so severe. Well, I'm in the middle of researching what do you do for severe addiction. You go to residential treatment for a couple of years. You go for a fully committed year, and then you go maybe on a work release program where you go to work during the day and then come back to the facility at night. And then maybe you go to a halfway house for another couple of years. Well, we're not doing that for the hundreds of millions of people who are addicted to processed foods. So the next level of treatment is something called intensive outpatient, IOP. And I said, well, hospitals don't have a clue, and hospitals are profiting from this. So they don't want to fix it either. I mean, they do, but the pharmaceutical industry has got their claws into the medical community, so they just don't get, they're trained to believe anything outside of a pharmaceutical is quackery.
Right.
So they're not gonna be supporting this. But right at that time, Zoom came along. Literally, I turned in the manuscript for the textbook in May of 2017, and I was already doing a daily phone call, which wasn't working. A daily phone call is not nearly enough to rewire 100 billion brain cells. You need to rewire I'm serious. You need to rewire every friggin' brain cell, and there are 100 billion of them. So Zoom came along, and I thought, wow, wow, wow. I wonder if this would work. We did a beta the first week of January 2018. And these were people who had been on my daily phone call, and they were all eating clean by the end of the week. They had not been able to get to eating clean, going through withdrawal from all these different substances, maintaining maintaining the elimination of these. They hadn't been able to do it with a daily phone call for 2 years. But boom, within 1 week, they were all eating clean. So I had scheduled a paid public week the following week. Same thing, same friggin' thing. Even at the end of day 1, everybody from the outside. So we had the people from the beta who were on, and that I didn't know about mirror neurons at this point. But the fact that there were people eating clean from the week before, you need at least 5 people to fully engage brain cells. And the more similarities between the people, the better this works. But by the end of the first day, I think we had, 7 or 10 people from the outside. They were all eating clean. I was shocked. Actually, at that point, I had spent 22 years looking for a reliable method. I'm going to start tearing up here. 22 years looking for a reliable way to get people off of processed foods. I started out with a handout. I'm sure that once people know they should eat this and not that, they'll just do it. No. I went through 14 different, really highly committed efforts to get people off of processed foods. And there it was. It was probably January 7th or January 8th, 2018. There it was. After 22 years of looking, there it was.
So
mirror neuron engagement.
The mirror neurons don't engage when it's just auditory. It needs to be visual as well.
So you can get some mirror neuron engagement from auditory, but getting the visual, the eye to eye. And you think about how were these brain cells developed over 7 million years? For 7 million years, until humans developed language capabilities, everything they saw was true. So that's why in 98% of the brain, there is no filter. The brain absorbs messaging and files it away as if it were true. And this is how the food industry has made, they kill 1 million Americans every 2 years. A million Americans die of diet-related diseases every 2 years. COVID, the epidemic of COVID, would not have happened unless it was coming in on top of processed food addiction with compromised immune systems. Yes. So you have this, but how is the food industry able to do that? How is it able to persuade those reward system brain cells to accept this messaging? It's because only this little tiny frontal lobe, 2% of the brain, has the ability to tell the difference between something true and something not true. And the only reason that capability developed is because language developed. Until you had language, there was no way to lie or deceive another person. Yeah. So you've got to get, once you stop bombarding the addicted brain cells and the blood flow stops being taken up by the addicted and stress pathways, it will return to the frontal lobe. It's the coolest thing. People think losing weight's the coolest thing. No, getting your frontal lobe online is really cool. People have been told, for example, that they're stupid. They've been told that they're slow. They've been told that they're dumb. Boom. The frontal lobe starts getting blood flow, and they're brilliant. So these are the kinds of very, very cool, fun things. This is why it is worth it. It is worth it to get off the processed foods and get off the messaging, get off the cueing, get off the triggering, train the brain to go to the pain rather than the pleasure, this deceptive pleasure. Retrain the brain. It's like learning a language, and it takes years. And this quick weight loss thing, all it does is fire up the fear of famine brain.
Right. Well, they certainly know how to market to us to keep us cycling through this endless loop, right? So we really need to step back from the dieting industry, the food industry, and all of the marketing and messaging. It's good. I think it's so good to go back, actually closer to 150 years, go back and really understand the history of modern medicine and understand the amount of marketing, and it's generational marketing, and understand Edward Bernays and the history of propaganda, and how it has been since your grandparents, it has been in place, and it's a machine. It is like, it really is akin to the Matrix, isn't it? You're plugged in and you're doped up, and you are plugged into a matrix where it is designed to keep us as cattle. Just right.
Yes.
We're fighting amongst ourselves. When I came from Canada into the United States and saw the difference in our political systems, I'm not saying that a parliamentary system is any better or any worse. What I am saying is that it was just a new perspective as an adult coming into the United States, going, oh, okay, two parties. That's interesting. Two is not a choice. Two is a dilemma. When you're only given two, it's a dilemma, right? And so what I really clearly saw was that it was the way they set up the two-party system it's moral and value based arguments, so that they keep us, the 99%, fighting amongst ourselves. Because how do you control a population when there's less than 1% of the people controlling us? You keep us fighting amongst ourselves. How do you control the cattle? Right? And so if they constantly keep up, like, abortion, and I'm not saying these issues aren't, like, legitimate issues, but the way they fight, the politicians fight on camera and then go behind the scenes and shake hands, and they're all buddy behind the scenes, and it's professional wrestling. Right? So what we need to do, and we need to use that very small 2% of our critical faculty, of our frontal brain, right? And we need to get the 30,000-foot view of how the entire society is set up to control you, to suck money out of your wallet, and to keep you sick and suffering. And not to do that to depress you, but to free you. When you see the matrix, you can free yourself from it.
Yes.
Another point is you touched on the autonomic nervous system, and one thing that happens when our body goes into fight or flight, which is the sympathetic response, is that it shunts blood away from the logic centers of the brain. So if you now we think, oh well, I'm not in fight or flight. I had a client once tell me, because I repeatedly, she would do all my homework, except she wouldn't do the homework that surrounded calming her nervous system, right? Getting her out of fight or flight. She wouldn't do that homework. I thought it was really interesting. She'd eat a pound of broccoli, but she wouldn't like take 5 deep breaths and go for a walk, or like meditate or whatever, right? And after like 5 sessions, I said, why, there's a lot of stress in your life. Why aren't you doing this homework? And she said, I don't feel stress. And now, at the time, her mom was dying of cancer. She had a very busy job as a manager, and then she came home and she had a daughter and a husband to cook and clean for, and there's a lot of symptoms that she was expressing that were stress related, that were unmanaged stress related. Physical stress, right? Her body was in the sympathetic nervous system response, and I said, I'm glad you said that, because stress isn't an emotion, right? It's that your physiology is switched over into like emergency mode, and your body stops, certain enzymatic processes stop happening, so your body is not
Mm,
healing. Your body
mm,
shunts resources. And the analogy I like, because I'm a big sci-fi fan. If you've ever watched Star Trek, like Captain Picard will say, um when they're under a Borg attack, and they're really losing, that he needs to shut down the floors that aren't in use, and divert all energy to the shields. And that's what
right,
this is. So being in stress
right.
mode, your body is shutting down anti-cancer properties, immune
Mm-hmm,
properties,
mm-hmm,
healing the lining of your stomach and your intestines. All these
mm-hmm.
properties that aren't essential for immediate survival get suppressed.
They're deprived of
They're
blood flow.
they're deprived, exactly, the
The
body.
blood flow is going to the muscles.
Yes, so that you can
Yeah,
fight or flee or survive
or
in some
flee.
way. And the
Yep.
problem is, people think, well, I wasn't in a quote unquote stressful situation today. I wasn't in a car crash. I didn't fight a bear. And yet, what people don't know is that you could be sitting here listening to this podcast and already be in fight or flight. Like,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
because your thoughts can trigger it, the foods you eat, the processed foods you eat can
mm-hmm.
trigger it.
Yep.
There's so many things. You don't actually have to do anything
Yeah.
external to trigger your ancient mechanism of survival. And so
Yeah.
when we're
And you
in
can
that,
be habitual. You can just be
yes,
habitual.
habituated
It can
to it,
do
right?
your all your glands and organs are trained to be in that state, and you might not even be aware of it. What
Right.
it's just what you're saying. Yeah.
What do you do in your program to help uh turn that off, get us out of sympathetic nervous system response, get us back into the nervous system, get us back into parasympathetic nervous system response of rest and digest, and so get the blood flow going back into the frontal lobe, so that we can begin to really make behaviors consciously.
Yeah. So the big thing about our program is called the Addiction Reset Community, and is the very first stressor that is vastly relieved by coming into the program is isolation. You immediately get oxytocin releases. So those systems in the brain, the feel-good systems in the brain, aren't working too well. But being among community releases oxytocin. And oxytocin will help the dopamine system start to work again. Immediately, the fear of being eaten by a predator, which has been instilled over 7 million years, is gone, because you now have people around you.
Mm.
And 98% of the brain doesn't know that those people aren't right there. 98% of the brain does not understand screens.
Mm-hmm.
So it really does believe that those people they're right in the next room, or they're right in front of us, but they're in our house. They're a couple of feet away. So immediately, the stress of isolation, and not just physical isolation, but processed foods cut off our ability to connect to other people. We have brain fog, we have craving, we have shame, we have a body shape that people are eyeballing disdainfully. We we
Raging.
feel we are raging, we are anxious, we are making up stories about how they don't like us. We're not connecting. We're
Mm-hmm.
not connecting. So you come into the ARC, the Addiction Reset Community, and people in the ARC, the managers, are trained to to let the member know that we understand what's going on with them. We also have been through periods where we had lost control over food, where we had this deep depression, and just almost immediately, that mirror neuron engagement. Oh, oh, this person is like me. They
Mm.
understand me. They're not telling me to push back from the table, for heaven's sakes. Now, why is that so important? Go back to the 7 million years of evolution. And if you were able to communicate to another person, if you could look them in the eyes and make enough sounds to say, there is a tiger behind that bush, you would live. If you went to that person and you signaled with your eyes and your fingers and that there was something wrong there, and that person just said, "Oh, calm down. Let's see. Oh, you have hyperexcitability. Let's give you some medication for that." Then you would die, because the tiger would pounce. So the ability for another person to see exactly what is going on with you and acknowledge it and affirm it and agree that it is real is a huge relief. From there, then you get into the complexities of changing your food. And what we've learned over these 26 years is that there may be other problems that have to be solved before you can start eating in a different way. You might have emotional, mental, or physical abuse going on in the household. You may have to work on relationship boundaries before you can even begin to go do grocery shopping. You may be subjected to queuing. You might be working in a food environment, or you may have a saboteur at home,
Mm-hmm.
or you may be too tired or brain fogged, and it may be that somebody else is going to have to get on and order some groceries for you. You may have to start with sleep because fatigue and sleep deprivation are huge cues. You may have to start with turning off screens earlier and earlier in the evening before you can have enough mental clarity, because screens are there to also scramble your brains.
Yes.
To have enough mental clarity that you could actually, put a chicken breast and some broccoli. And we give people the option to use starches or not, just to make a meal. Get a couple of scrambled eggs going. You may have to solve other problems before you can even start on the food. But the thing that's so cool is no matter how deep the cognitive impairment, the brain fog, the confused thinking, the cravings, mirror neurons will take you there. And the whole rest
Mm-hmm.
of the brain can be just so badly addicted, and the cognitive impairment can be so severe you cannot think. The inflammation, because these foods are inflammatory and they inflame the brain.
Yes.
So the inflammation cuts off the ability to think. But through all that mess, through all that fog, mirror neurons are working. So people will just be so surprised. I ordered groceries and I made clean meals. I have been trying to do that for 20 years. I did it today. I've only been in here 2 or 3 days, but I did it today.
Mm-hmm.
I made clean meals today. I've been trying to do this for 20 years. What happened? Oh, see, you were on the Zoom. You were on the Arc all day, Monday and Tuesday. And so Wednesday you made clean meals. It's just so incredible. It's like you've been swimming in these rough, cold seas for your entire life. And
Mm-hmm.
finally, the lifeboat came along and threw you a life preserver. And somebody on the boat instructed you how to grab onto the life preserver. And when you got dragged over to the side of the boat, you decided to get in. It's so incredible, Ashley. I know I'm crying here, but it's amazing to be able to get somebody to safety in just a few days.
Yes. Yes. Um, I've heard this quote several times from different people, so I don't know who came up with it originally, but whoever it is, Mirror Neurons describes it. You are the summary of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yes, that's exactly
And
right.
I heard JLD is a podcaster, entrepreneur on fire, and he was one of the people I modeled learning different like technical things about podcasting and editing. When it was about 6 years ago when I was studying, it was actually, yeah, it was 6 years ago, so it was December, so it has been 6 years. I started studying on how to do a podcast, and I looked to him
Oh,
as well as Andrew Warner of Mixergy. Those are my two biggest models.
nice.
And JLD would almost every episode would say, you are the summary of the top 5 people you spend time with.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, it can also include the podcast you listen to. It can also include the
Oh,
content
yes.
you're consuming, right?
Yes.
And as I've been listening to you, I've been thinking about reflecting on the last few years of my life, because as I said in the intro, I'm on my own journey of overcoming my negative relationship with food, and healing my body. I've healed my body from a lot of things. I used to have type 2 diabetes, chronic adrenal fatigue, chronic infections, for which I was on
Wow.
constant antibiotics for. And I
Yeah.
had polycystic ovarian syndrome, and I was told by an endocrinologist after a battery of tests that I would never have kids, that I've conceived naturally
Jeez.
twice. Um,
Yay.
and I don't have diabetes anymore, don't have chronic adrenal fatigue anymore.
Right.
And for the last several years, I do not have polycystic ovarian syndrome, but I just got my blood work again, because I do that blood work, once or twice a year with my naturopath, and sure enough, there's zero evidence of polycystic ovarian syndrome, and yet it plagued
Yay.
me for over 20 years. And if you
Yeah.
go to an MD or an endocrinologist, they'll say you have it for the rest of your life, and it's a
No.
falsehood. Just like diabetes, you don't have to have those things. And
No.
what I've been working on is weight loss. And my problem has been my liver, and I couldn't figure out why every time I went to do health. I have done over 30 diets, and then my entire life, and I've shared this on the podcast before, and and that has definitely negatively impacted my body, and I've learned from that, and learned about how it harms the metabolism. The body goes into freak out mode. But even healthy diets, when I started to lose weight healthfully, my liver would become inflamed and would stick out and become distended. You could actually see it
Wow.
pushing out. And I went and got ultrasounds. And what I finally figured out is that my phase 2 of liver detox is so gummed up. I have some genetic SNPs, like MTHFR, and so for me, in the last 3 years, 3, 4 years, I've been really working on heavy metal detoxification, and lots of interviews
Good.
about it. Um, but since I started the podcast, my mirror neurons have really benefited from these interviews. So they're not video interviews, but I have found
Mm-hmm.
myself after an interview about, addiction, or about food addiction, or about healthful eating to nurture the body, and eating to bring stability and balance to hormones or to emotions. I've always found myself making better and better choices, and then like
Yep.
celebrating those choices. And what
Yep.
really also helped me, because I'm just seeing this now, is that I did take a year-long health coach training program through IIN, Institute for Integrative Nutrition, where it was videos, but they were recorded videos of the audience and of the lecturer, and then they would break out and they would show the audience, and I always felt like I was in the audience, and I'd cry with everyone, I'd laugh with everyone. I felt a real sense, like I felt like I was in the community, and they were recorded
Yes.
videos. And my
Yes.
food choices, and my health choices, like going to sleep at a better time, or removing certain things that were not healthy, adding certain things that gave me vibrance and joy and health, and activities that improved my health. All these little steps, every baby step, I felt like it was definitely uh easier, and I felt like I was celebrating it with this community, that as because I was
Yep.
watching these videos. So it makes so much sense
Yes.
that your Zoom calls live would
Mm-hmm.
create that sense. I can feel it's this warmness sort of in my stomach. I can feel it even now in my
Yes. You're
body.
getting an oxytocin release.
Right, right. Well,
Mm-hmm.
so in last year, we had such a hard time, everyone did, with COVID, but we have a child who is such an extrovert. He craves other children's attention. And so I found a small community of moms, like-minded, very holistic, very, I call those crunchy moms, but very holistic,
Yeah.
organic eaters, gluten-free, all that kind of stuff. And they all have, they all have kids, and they all wanted to create a community where the kids can play freely in the parks. And so we've been doing that together for a year and a half now.
Super.
And
Super.
I noticed that I'm almost addicted to going to the park and doing our weekly meetups, because I feel
Yep.
so good in their presence, and we just gab about whatever and give each other, ideas, and share with each other. But that sense of that oxytocin, that sense of community, there's nothing like
Mm-hmm.
it. It's just
No,
wonderful. So I can
there
totally
really
see, yeah, why your Zoom calls would be um quick to help people start to
yes,
make better and better
yes.
choices. Now, okay, so they step into the Zoom call, their mirror neurons are firing. Um how is it that they it really does help them overcome the withdrawal, the physical withdrawal? Can you walk
Yeah,
us through more of
so
the, like, biochemical, or like what's happening in the brain when someone is stepping into these Zoom calls?
so the dopamine is working better. The oxytocin actually works by supporting the dopamine system. So if your dopamine system isn't working at all, you get an oxytocin release, so you will feel better for sure. So withdrawal avoidance is one of the reasons why people can't get off of particularly the refined carbohydrates. But one thing I hope all of your listeners know is that withdrawal from refined carbohydrates, the sugars and flours, sweeteners, is 4 to 8 days. And people get to day 3 and maybe their cravings intensify. Day 4, the cravings are still just unbearable. Hang on, because that is going to go away. And if other people know, like, we also encourage people to take that list very slowly. It might take a couple of years to get off of the 7 major categories of addictive substances, because they are affecting 4 different pathways. And the other thing to remember is that it only takes about 3 weeks for the dopamine receptors to open up again. People feel better within a couple of days because the pancreas is no longer pumping out vast amounts of insulin, which are driving down blood sugar, which is releasing the adrenaline. So the
Mm.
anxiety levels start going down and getting better within a day or 2 or 3 or 4. So people do start feeling calmer. They'll say that. They'll come on day 2 and say, wow, I can't believe, this just happened and I didn't blow up. And they begin to like themselves more. There's a lot of self-hatred, self-blame, self-stigmatization. We use a lot of science to explain to people what happened to them and kind of disengage them from the mythology that the recovery industry, the therapeutic industry has created. Because when therapists can't get on top of this addiction in their patients because they're not giving the patient enough immersion recovery. They're,
Mm.
1 hour a week, and I think there are 167 hours in a week. 1 hour versus 167 hours, you are not going to retrain 100 billion brain cells by that approach. You need hours and hours and hours per day. You need a residential level of recovery. So people do, mirror neurons are watching other people get off of sugars and flours. We do have a pretty sophisticated method for managing the headache, the lethargy, the depression, the anxiety that come with withdrawal. We know how to manage those and make it not quite so painful. It's very important that withdrawal not be painful,
Right,
because
then you're training the brain to not like it, to not like being off of those things, like you said earlier. That makes so much
yeah.
sense.
So if you have a lapse and the cueing is so intense and the addicted brain cells are so sensitive, if you have a lapse, you want to be able to go straight back into withdrawal. you don't want that lapse to drag on for days or even years. You want to have a lot of confidence. Okay, I'm really good at managing withdrawal, and I'm going to put the rest of this down the disposal and get back into withdrawal. So, yeah, it's part of the training. So I feel like the addiction recovery community is a training community. What happens when children are born addicted is that they're trying to get life skills through an addicted brain, an inflamed brain, a craving brain, an impaired cognitive, uh, a brain that's impaired cognitively, and it just doesn't happen. Like I remember, I said, "Oh, you know what? I'm going to start trying to describe all the skills that we teach in this community." And it just the spreadsheet got longer and longer and longer. And finally, I sat back and I said, "Why? Oh, it's because it is one of the tenets of addiction that when the addiction starts, personality development stops. So if you start drinking at age 13, you have a different recovery than somebody who starts drinking heavily in their late 20s. You've just missed 15 years of personality development. Well, we never get any. So I say I've been in the ARC now for 4 years. I have very, very traumatic upbringing. I had that raging mother. I had the raging father. I had a raging older sister. This is in the 1950s. And already women were being positioned. Oh, modern women use convenience foods. So we had the Crisco and we had the cake mixes and we had the Tang and the juice concentrates and the jelly and the white bread and the Velveeta cheese. We had all those processed foods in the house already in the 1950s. Now we were skinny as rails because we didn't have the 15-pound packages of potato chips in our house, but we had the personality disorders. We were always fighting, all 5 of us. So I didn't get life skills. Now in the ARC, we lead with compassion. We lead with gentleness. We never tell our members what to do. We're using a form of communication called motivational interviewing, where we are listening carefully to the person's strengths, the member's strengths, and then we're really discussing in detail their strengths. What's happening there is you are literally rewiring the part of the brain that says, I can't do this. You're rewiring that part of the brain that says, I can do this. Look, everybody around me is doing this. I can do this, of course. And you've got the cooperation and the collaboration of the mirror neurons to do that. It works like gangbusters. It is shocking how well it works. 4 years later, I've thrown off, I don't know what percentage of my parents' negativity because their own self-confidence, self-esteem was so low. They were using caffeine and sugar and these processed foods and alcohol and cigarettes every day. Typical 1950s. He was a corporate executive and a PhD biochemist and a commander in the Navy. So he was a very authoritarian person. And then my mother was always drinking caffeine and sugar, and she had that totally wacko, emotional profile where you never knew when
Yeah.
she could go from calm to belting you
Right.
in 60 seconds. So growing up in that kind of a traumatic household, I was carrying a tremendous amount of fear and self-loathing and self-doubt. But over 4 years of being in the ARC, we do a lot of what we call ARC exercises, where we rewire a brain, and it's so simple. It's so incredibly simple. So an example would be what we call the because card. Because of blank, I used to blank, but now because of blank, I blank. So when you say because of blank, I used to blank, you are opening up the memory between 2 synapses, you're opening up the synapse between 2 memory cells. And when you do that, you can put new information in there so that if the memory comes up, it doesn't control behavior anymore. The new information controls behavior. So if I say, because I was addicted to processed foods, I used to rage. But now that I have eliminated processed foods, toxic media, toxic behaviors, toxic people, I am calm in all circumstances. So if something should happen to trigger like a memory of raging, instead of being pulled back into raging, nope, there's new information there. I am calm in all circumstances. It works. It's incredible. It's so simple. None of us are therapists. We're not providing any therapy. We're providing peer support and a structure and an environment and a community in which people can get back in touch with how wonderful they are. So the way advertising works is it wants to persuade us that we have a pain, there's something wrong with us, and we need to buy a product to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And none of that is true. We are incredible. We're spectacular. We have incredible resources inside of us. We need very little. We need shelter, transportation, clean food, good company. So it just works. But that is how you do it. That is how you get people. And we have members all over the world. It's a 24-hour a day operation. That 15 hours of live programming is extended over 24 hours.
I love it. Oh, it's so
Thank
exciting that
you.
you're having these results. The
Yeah.
question that's been on my mind is, because we talked about your recent work and all the work that's led up to these breakthroughs. I'm really curious, though, what was your thesis when you earned your PhD in addictive nutrition?
So it was to validate the DSM-4. This is a diagnostic manual for mental illness, and addictions are considered a mental illness. It was to validate the DSM-4 diagnostic criteria for alcoholism for overeating. And we did it right out of the box, and we did it with a really small sample. I'm teary because I remember I had to go to school for new fields to get that PhD. I went to Union Institute and University in Cincinnati. And the way it works is you have to collect faculty from other schools because you're in a new field. So there's no existing faculty. I got the greatest people to work with me. And it was only 64 people, and we got statistical significance, no problem. These characteristics of alcoholism are running rampant in overeaters.
So if it wasn't for your work, we would where would the food addiction field be if it wasn't for your work?
Actually, oh dear. I don't know. It would still be in the dark ages. I have to tell you this little story if you don't mind.
I'd love to hear it.
So, how in the world let's see, I have to think about how old I was, but mid 60s. How in the world did I carve out 3 years full time to research and write? The textbook is 240,000 words. It's built on 2,000 studies. I wrote 70% of it, and I persuaded other scientists to write the other 30%, and I edited the other 30%. I persuaded food addiction practitioners to co-write the chapters on behaviors, and it was just such a confluence of factors. My dad died in 2014,
I'm sorry.
the same year that CRC Press came to me and asked me to write the textbook. And one of my failed attempts to get other people to recover was a prepared meal company. So there I was in Houston spending my divorce settlement to run this company. I thought, well, just give people clean food. They'll feel so great. They'll want to continue, which is like saying to an alcoholic, oh, listen, I'm just going to give you this nice clean water. You just drink this water and place the alcohol, and you'll see how great you feel, and then you'll just want to do it.
I loved your intentions, though. I think they were the best of intentions, but like you've outlined, it's not that simple. It's not a matter of just making good food choice. Like, I mean, that's like
No.
saying to all the people with food addiction, why don't you just eat healthy? Why, you know what to eat.
Yeah.
Just eat fruits and vegetables.
Oh,
Just go eat healthy.
yeah.
And
Yeah, why didn't I think of that?
and that's where all, there's so much, like you said, stigma and shame around it.
There's all this mythology. There's all this
yes.
insanity, this confusion.
Yes.
People have made up stories about what's going on. And yeah, for their I'm not going to say this. I was going to say for their profit. But I know my daughter, my MD daughter, I have a daughter who's an MD. She's also an MBA, fortunately, because she finally said to me one day, Mom, I cannot fix people in an 8-minute office visit. And I'm not going to spend the rest of my life trying. She has now left practice. She's now a full-time consultant. Yeah. So the whole system, and she's a well-intentioned person, and she left behind in her clinic well-intentioned doctors. The whole system is set up so that the only thing that doctor can do is be a marketing person for the pharmaceutical industry.
No, they're trained drug dealers, and they, like you said, they're MDs are not bad people. They're
not.
Inherently, they're good people. The system is corrupt, and it has been since its birth, and that's why it's so good to go back and study the history of the modern medical system and see that from day one, the universities that teach the medical schools, the pharmaceutical companies have been funding them and have been controlling what they can do. And the AMA, all of that is designed to keep out real cures. Doctors who've come up with systems that have actually cured cancer more successfully than the cut, burn, and poison method have been run off to other countries, basically, time and time again. And you're not allowed to have a cure. One of my mentors is he's in his late 80s. I'm not sure how old exactly, but I think he's 86. 35 years ago, 40 years ago, around then, he worked at Yerkes Parent Research Institute. He has multiple degrees. He's a pathologist. He's a veterinarian. He's a naturopathic physician now, but he started out, as a large animal vet and then was into the research, and he's written many papers. He discovered by accident the cause and cure for cystic fibrosis. He had other pathologists confirm his findings. He brought it to the Yerkes Parent Research Institute, and they fired him and blacklisted him from the research field. He went back to his alma mater and was going to be a professor. He was unpacking, and the dean came in and showed him a letter that said that the university would lose all their funding if he would remain there, because he discovered a cure for that basically in one generation we could completely stop and never again have cystic fibrosis. And it is get this, it's a selenium deficiency in utero, just like neurotube defects are caused by folate. Well, we know that. He also discovered zinc at the moment of conception. Zinc deficiency causes Down syndrome, and selenium deficiency can also cause muscular dystrophy. It depends, causes one or the other, but he discovered all these different. That's what a lot of his research was around nutrient deficiency in utero and the diseases it causes. But all of it was completely suppressed, and he fought and fought and fought and fought, and all the doors were closed because that would have cost the pharmaceutical companies billions. Now, that your daughter, the MD, is not taught this. She's taught how to prescribe drugs. She's not taught that there's a cure and that there's a way to prevent these illnesses in the first place, because MDs are not trained in this.
She's taught that everything you just described is quackery.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's very bad out there.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, my dad died, and CRC Press appeared at the same time, and suddenly I had enough, and he left me enough income. My stepmom was living in Cincinnati, so I moved from Houston back to Cincinnati to get her through the end of her life. And I walked in to the first apartment I looked at, beautiful little tiny apartment overlooking the Ohio River. And 3 years, I turned in the manuscript and my stepmother died.
Oh
And
my
I moved out here
gosh.
to Seattle. But it's just like the universe cleared out 3 years of my life where I could sit full time and write and edit that textbook. And that now today, anybody who says, oh, it's still controversial, they are lying. That you just open the textbook, there are 2,000 citations. Why is there so much research on this? It's because of the amount of research on obesity, eating disorders, and drug addiction. We have brain imaging technology. We know exactly what an addicted brain looks like. Overeaters' brains are addicted brains. And you can't, and so all that obesity and eating disorder research is actually describing aspects of the addiction diagnosis. The addiction diagnosis is 11 behaviors. It's unintended use, failure to cut back, time spent, cravings, unfulfilled roles, relationship problems, activities given up, hazardous use. It's use in spite of knowledge of consequences. It's tolerance or progression, and it's withdrawal. All of those things are used to diagnose alcoholism, and they are all rife. They're everywhere in overeating.
One thing I'd like to clarify, because we use the term overeating, can it, like you said, you guys were skinny when you grew up, but it would have been considered food addiction. So there's some people overeat and are obese, but my mother, who was never obese, never, sometimes she'd say she's 15 pounds overweight. I think she was 5. She'd point to her tummy and she'd had a little tiny pooch that could not have been more than the size of a kitten. She was always a size 6, just a very, very fit woman. She did step classes. She was kind of addicted to exercise and really controlling food. And then, like I said, she'd then have these sort of side projects of sugar that she had to dig into secretly. But and then there was alcohol every night, like socially, right? Like my parents would split a bottle or 2 of wine, and that was like so there was like these things, which also leads to like the sugar going up and down. And a lot of times sugar imbalance is misdiagnosed as there's similarities between bipolar and sugar swings. So
I agree
that's
with that.
really important to understand about oneself and also one's partner in life. My husband, and I've said this on the show before, and he gave me permission to say this, but we noticed that every single argument we've ever had where kind of I mean, I'm not perfect. In arguments where he's being irrational and I'm like calm and he's freaking out, right? I'm like, why are you doing this? Right? We figured out it was low blood sugar. And that's when we really started to dig into, this was 2014. We really turned to each other and went, every time, it's like I said, okay, but at the time he has chosen to be a vegan. He's now a vegan. But back then I said, let me scramble you some eggs and then let's talk in 20 minutes. And he'd eat some eggs and 20 minutes later, he's like, I don't know why. He said to me, I feel like Jekyll and Hyde. I feel like I'm watching myself and I can't even control myself, being that way, being so nasty. And he's not a nasty, he's a very sweet, loving person. But when he's in low blood sugar, watch out. And
that's
so
exactly why I got into this field 26 years ago.
Yes. Yeah,
it's personalities.
So we have but not everyone has to be, because you I think the term overeating is, people go, well, I don't overeat at all, I'm not fat. So and it's like, well, that's not, you can, maybe you could just distinguish the difference between overeating, emotional eating. There's binge eating, right? There's binging, but they all fall under the category of food addiction. Is that correct?
Yes. I think the American Psychiatric Association, which is the author, of course, of this diagnostic manual, they cannot get their brains wrapped around the idea that processed food addiction exists. So they've tried to describe other syndromes, but So let's just take binge eating disorder. Binging, it's very interesting, but binging is not a requirement. The word binging does not appear in any of the diagnostic criteria for addictions, for any kind of addiction. So how did the American Psychiatric Association decide how to diagnose an addiction? It's through behaviors. So when you don't have your frontal lobe and the addicted brain cells are controlling behavior, very specific things happen. You have relationship problems. You start dropping activities because you'd rather go home and use. You have relationship problems for the reasons that you just described. You have this Jekyll and Hyde personality. You can't fulfill your roles because you're too tired or drunk or drugged up or passed out from processed foods. So you have behaviors. It starts out, the first four criteria are things that are going on inside the person. You have a plan to use a certain amount and you don't follow the plan. That's unintended use. You've tried to cut back. And this is again where you see prevalence. So over 70% of Americans are overweight or obese. They don't want to be that way. They've tried to cut back and failed.
Yeah.
So this is something else you would have to see. You would have to see really widespread prevalence. Time spent. People are they might stop at 3 fast food places on their way home from work. And then when they do get home, they might go back out in the evening and get more grocery items. Cravings. Everybody has cravings. The cravings are so prevalent that people don't even know that it's possible to not have them. So you have it starting inside the person with those first four. And then in the next three, you have it affecting their behaviors, the failure to fulfill roles, relationship problems, and activities given up. And then the last four are measuring progression. It's getting worse. You are getting sick from it. Use in spite of knowledge of consequences is a very common manifestation of addiction. You know you shouldn't be. You start to say it, I know I shouldn't, but, and then you go and use it. That's a sign of an addiction. And eating more of a substance, you see that over the years in the manufacturers just making larger and larger containers of these substances. And then withdrawal. You see people using processed foods not because they're hungry, it's because they're tired or they're irritable or they're anxious or they're depressed or they're foggy. Those are withdrawal avoidance. They have a headache, they have a stomach ache, they're lethargic, they're bored, they can't think. Those are withdrawal avoidance. So this is how you decide. And you're right, I say overeaters, but they're people who are using processed foods in those 11 ways. And you're right, 20% of diabetics are not overweight. 20% of people accumulate fat around their organs and not under their skin. You can't see it. But the way the American Psychiatric Association trains psychiatrists and therapists of all varieties to tell whether the person in front of them is suffering under an addiction, they ask those 11 questions. That's how you know. And it's not a weight issue. In fact, thin people who have food addiction are more traumatized in some ways because they have sought help from the health professions, and the doctors or whoever just look at them and say, you don't have a problem, get out of here. And they are being traumatized. They're right in front of their very eyes. I don't know if your listeners would relate to this phenomenon, but I call it the remote control robot phenomenon, where your frontal lobe is screaming, no, 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 no. But the addicted brain cells in the midbrain have control over behavior. And like a robot or like a zombie, you are walking to the kitchen, out to
Yeah.
the car to go for fast food, and you're two different people. It's terrifying to have that experience.
Yeah.
And thin people have that experience.
I'm so excited about your program. The more I think about how someone could plug themselves in and get those mirror neurons firing, get the oxytocin of community firing to their
Mm-hmm.
advantage to help them overcome it is amazing. Little things like that I've seen for me work is I order my grocery. Now I love going to the grocery store and like picking out my own fresh produce. It's not that I don't like going to the grocery store, but what I've noticed is I'll add a bunch of stuff to my cart online and then I'll stare at the cart and I'll ask myself with
Mm-hmm.
each item, do I really need this?
Super,
And
super.
I get to like slow down, use
Mm-hmm.
my, and I kind of have a conversation, that internal dialogue. Because what you described, that robot, for me, it's more like a
Mm-hmm.
possession, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
like an entity, like a satanic possession, trying to like force you, overcoming your own consciousness to do bad, like to you, right? And so I look at that list of foods and I'm like, okay, I've got my vegetables there. And then, oh, wait, okay. I mean, I'm gonna say cookies. I don't add cookies, but I'm just like, I can't think of something bad at the moment. But like, okay, there's those cookies there. And I'm like, do I need that? Do I really
Great.
need that? How am I going to feel after I
Great.
eat that? Does that really serve me? Does that really help me and my family? Because whatever I'm buying, everyone's eating. And then I hit the delete button. And then there'll be that like, no, wait, and then the fear of missing out, right? That FOMO kicks in like,
Uh-huh.
no, you'll feel bad if you don't, and you'll regret not having it in your cart. You'll regret it. And I have to talk. It's like a conversation I have with
It's a
myself.
battle.
It
It's a
is. It's a
battle between
battle.
the addicted brain cells and the frontal lobe.
It is.
People don't realize that different cortices of the brain can battle each other. And that addicted cortex, it does not want to give up control. And
Mhm.
it'll keep coming back. It sleeps with one eye open and it will never go away. That programming is there permanently. So this is something that we have to protect ourselves against the rest of our lives. And the thing is, it's not just food addiction, it's screen addiction and it's porno addiction. And the addiction will happily slide over to some other source. Shopping
Mhm.
addiction, gambling, whether it's a behavior addiction like a process addiction, or whether it's substance based like alcohol or prescription drugs or any of the other recreational drugs, it'll happily slide around. So this is something else that we're very aware of in our community. We are creating a foundation, very fundamental foundation of self-regard, self-respect, and from that, self-caring, self-liking, self-loving. From that comes the urge to protect ourselves. So we're starting in the right place.
Your work is tremendous, and if it wasn't for you, we would be in the dark ages still, like you said, with understanding food addiction and understanding what's going on in the brain and really acknowledging it and taking the stigma away. There's so many people
Mhm.
needlessly suffering. We
Yes.
we need not look farther than the statistics of disease in the United States alone, and every other country tends to follow. I mean, we're the worst in the United States. We really are. It's
Mhm.
unfortunate,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
if you look at the United States spends the most money in the world on quote unquote healthcare, and yet it's the worst for many
Mhm.
outcomes.
Mhm.
So we have to acknowledge that this system is broken and we need to take ownership of our health. That's why you're listening. Anyone who's listening is taking ownership of their health and not waiting to get sick and then go to a doctor and be given a drug. They're taking ownership
Yeah.
of their health. And if it
Yep.
wasn't for you, we would still be stuck in the dark ages when it comes to understanding how processed food there is an addiction. It is designed to be addictive like cigarettes, And
Yep.
that literally the cigarette companies went, well, how are we going to use this? How are we going to use addiction in other places? Right. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just phenomenal.
Yeah.
So thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for the
Thank you.
groundbreaking work that you do. And I'm so
Thank
excited
you.
for listeners to check out foodaddictionresources.com, which is your website. It provides free evidence-based handouts. And then you have
Hang on.
foodaddictionbooks.com as well.
Yeah, hang on. The best place to go is processedfoodaddiction.com. That's like the hub
Yes. Okay,
of all of
great.
our other websites. Go there, take the self quiz to see if you're experiencing the signs of processed food addiction, and then sign up for the free information and just get on our email list, and then you can start to consider the programs that we have.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to have you back on the show at some point to continue
Oh,
sharing,
sure.
because what it sounds like is you are constantly um learning. You're tapped into the research when it comes to the brain and all the latest research. And
Yeah.
then your community, which started in 2018 and has just taken off, and you're seeing that people
Yeah.
within 3 days of being in the community, they're able to finally start to cook healthy foods, and that that oxytocin and that community is helping them overcome the 4 to 8 day withdrawal period.
Yep.
So I'm very excited about that. So it's processfoodaddiction.com. And of course, the links to
Yeah.
everything
Start there.
that Dr. Joan Ifland does is going to be in the show notes of today's podcast at learnyourhealth.com. Is there anything you'd like to say to wrap up today's interview?
Yes. This is not your fault.
Mm.
These are things that were done to you for profit. This is not your fault. Not the weight regain, not the loss of control, not the hiding, not the binging, not the weight, not the diet related disease. None of this is your fault. It requires a lot of skill building and training to get out of it, but it's not your fault. And it's not because of your childhood issues. It's because you have an addiction to substances.
And through Joan's program, I'm very excited that she's getting results, and you can get results too. So I love that there's a supportive community that can help you, and I'm excited to check it out as well. I like to say, keep your mind so open your brain could fall out, right? I'm an open-minded skeptic, so try everything. Try everything. Obviously, be skeptical, but try everything. So, I'm all about growing. And if I could grow, and what it sounds like, your community helps people to learn new life skills. And if I can grow,
Totally.
if I can figure out, like, where did my personality stop developing because of addiction? I don't know. What age, and I've seen it in others, but we have blinders to our own self, right? So it's easy to see in others. We can't see in ourselves. But if I could learn more new life skills to grow, I am all for it. I'm all for it. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was amazing. Truly amazing, Ashley. You're a gifted podcaster.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I can't wait to have you back.
All right. Take care.
Awesome. That's a wrap. How do you feel it went?
Oh my God. This might be the best interview I've ever done. I don't know why. I don't cry very often during interviews, but there's something about your understanding and your own knowledge that made it safe for me to feel my emotions in this situation. Yeah, we are saving lives.
You are saving lives. You are saving lives.
Yeah,
Yes.
and saving people from really, really painful lives. We're not just preventing them from dying, we're also preventing them from missing out on their lives.
Yeah. Yes. Do you feel like you're missing something? Are you searching for the right answers to solve your health issues? Do you feel like you should have more energy and mental clarity? With everything you're doing for your health, you may be missing one key component. Our body needs 90 essential nutrients every day to function optimally. 60 minerals, 12 amino acids, 2 fatty acids, and 16 vitamins each and every day. Because of the farming practices over the last 100 years, most of our food has 60% fewer vitamins and minerals compared to just 50 years ago. So if you aren't eating 8 cups of a variety of fruits and vegetables each day, you may be missing some of your essential nutrients. These are the raw building blocks the body needs to create new healthy tissue, healthy hormones, balanced digestive system, strong muscles, bones and joints, and maintain an optimal functioning nervous system. Especially if you're experiencing more stress, or if you've gone through an illness like an infection, that takes more resources. So if you're not consuming more vitamin C and more of all the 16 vitamins and all the 60 minerals when you're going through more stress, either physical stress, emotional stress, mental stress, those stressors take more nutrients to kind of survive those bumps in the road in life. And over time, that whittles away, that kind of depletes our nutrient tanks, our stores in our body. Without these 90 essential nutrients, things start to break down. Now, you've experienced these breakdowns. Maybe you get migraines, maybe you're exhausted, maybe your hormones are out of balance, your digestion's out of balance, or you have some aches and pains. Maybe you've even been diagnosed with something. You have a series of symptoms, and if those symptoms all look like something, then we can diagnose it, right? That's what MDs can do. MDs will treat these breakdowns with drugs and mask your symptoms. But if your body has a nutrient deficiency, no amount of drugs will fix the problem. 7 years ago, I embarked on a journey to cure my diabetes, infertility, PCOS, high blood pressure, and chronic adrenal fatigue. I felt like I was a mess. Through my research, I found a company that made natural supplements to address these nutrient needs. They formulated their supplements to exceed all standards of quality. Their minerals are the most bioavailable and absorbed by the body that I have ever found. After getting on their protocols for healthy hormones and blood sugar, along with their dietary recommendations for better health, I reversed my type 2 diabetes, I reversed my infertility, I no longer had high blood pressure, my energy and vitality came back, and after 6 years of trying to get pregnant with my husband before we found these supplements, once we got on these supplements, we were able to conceive our wonderful healthy son, who's now 3 years old, and he is amazing, and we would have never had that had we not found this company. Speaking of our son, he's also taking these supplements for optimal health. His pediatrician thinks they're amazing. If you'd like to give these supplements a try and see for yourself if you're experiencing a nutrient deficiency, please go to takeyoursupplements.com. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Their health coaches are phenomenal. I personally know all of them. They're amazing people. And I just want you to know, as my listener, I feel like I need to protect my listeners. I would never promote anything that I didn't 100% believe in and I didn't feel was healthy or good for you. I feel like you're my tribe, and I'm sharing this information. In fact, I've been doing this podcast so that I can help as many people as possible gain their health back. And so the health coaches at takeyoursupplements.com, I really trust that they will make sure that you're well taken care of. They will work with you to help determine the best protocol for your nutrient needs and work within your budget. They will also help to implement a holistic protocol that includes supporting a healthy diet and lifestyle. Go to takeyoursupplements.com, fill out the form, and one of their health coaches will get back to you really shortly. And then you guys can schedule a time to talk on the phone, and they will work with you to help you dial in all your nutrient needs. I really look forward to hearing about your experience with them. Please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to me in our Facebook group. Go to Facebook, search Learn True Health, and join our group. Let me know what you think about the wonderful health coaches at takeyoursupplements.com. And by the way, when you go to takeyoursupplements.com and you get assigned to a health coach, they're your health coach. You're not going to keep getting a different person every time. You get one person, and they work with you and they hold your hand for months down the road. They're there for you to support you month after month while you're on your nutrient protocol, and they're helping you dial in your nutrient needs. They're really wonderful like that. So I know you'll enjoy your experience with them, and I'd love to hear about your experience with them. Please feel free to, you can email me as well, ashley@learntruehealth.com. I love hearing success stories. Like I said, I've been working with a supplement company for my own health, and I've reversed so many issues. I love sharing this information, because I think that many of you will be able to resolve your issues with nutrition, just like I've seen many people do. With that said, go to takeyoursupplements.com, fill out your information, and a health coach is very excited to start working with you and helping you get your health back.